Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has outlined what he describes as meaningful but incomplete progress in the latest round of peace discussions with the United States, delivering his remarks by video link to a conference in Sweden. His message, delivered as the war nears its fourth year, reflects a combination of guarded optimism and a clear warning that the most difficult issues remain unresolved. Zelensky began by explaining that the Ukrainian and US negotiating teams in Geneva have managed to coordinate on several of the most sensitive elements now under discussion. He said that despite the complexity of the agenda, Kyiv had succeeded in ensuring that the priorities it views as essential to any settlement remain under active consideration. In his words, "In the steps we have coordinated with the side of the US, we've managed to keep extremely sensitive points on the table, including the full release of all Ukrainian prisoners of war under the all-for-all formula and civilians, and the complete return of Ukrainian children abducted by Russia. These are important steps, but to achieve real peace, more is needed." The president's comments place renewed attention on the set of humanitarian and legal matters that Ukraine insists must be addressed before any broader political or territorial questions can advance. This includes the status of Ukrainian prisoners of war, the future of tens of thousands of civilians detained or displaced, and the ongoing concerns regarding the forced transfer of Ukrainian children, which Kyiv and multiple international institutions have repeatedly described as a violation of international law. Zelensky's reference to an all-for-all formula is consistent with Ukraine's long-standing position that any prisoner of war exchange must involve the release of all remaining Ukrainian captives held by Russian authorities and affiliated forces. Ukrainian officials have said repeatedly that dozens of previous exchanges, while significant, have still left a substantial number of servicemen and civilians unaccounted for. The president emphasized that maintaining this issue on the negotiating agenda is, from Kyiv's perspective, non-negotiable. The second element, Zelensky highlighted the return of Ukrainian children taken to Russia or to Russian-controlled territory remains one of the most difficult and politically sensitive issues of the war. Ukrainian authorities, international monitors, and several Western governments have documented cases of minors being separated from their families during evacuations, military operations, or transfers organized by Russian institutions. Kyiv insists that every child must be returned under international supervision. Zelensky's assertion that this issue remains on the table signals that Ukrainian negotiators consider it a central pillar of any future settlement. While the president described these developments as important steps, he also made clear that they are only part of a larger, unfinished process. His repeated emphasis that more is needed reflects the gap that still separates the parties on issues such as security guarantees, control of territory, the future of occupied regions, and the wider framework for post-conflict arrangements. Ukrainian officials have made it clear in recent weeks that they will resist any pressure to accept interim agreements that leave unresolved questions about sovereignty or security. Zelensky's appearance at the Swedish conference comes as Kyiv continues to adjust its diplomatic posture. Ukrainian officials have intensified talks with Western partners ahead of several high-level meetings expected later in the winter. The Geneva channel, involving both Ukrainian and US negotiators, has become an increasingly central venue for discussing potential frameworks for de-escalation or future settlement structures. While no comprehensive plan has yet been announced, both sides have confirmed that the discussions include a combination of humanitarian, military and political components. The president's remarks also reflect the broader context in which Ukraine now operates. The war, approaching its fourth year, has reshaped Ukraine's institutions, its economy and its diplomatic priorities. Kyiv continues to rely heavily on Western military and financial support, while also pursuing parallel diplomatic tracks, including discussions with European partners, coordination with the G7, and outreach to countries in Asia, Latin America and Africa. For Ukraine, the goal remains consistent: securing a settlement that restores territorial integrity, ensures long-term security and addresses the humanitarian consequences of the conflict. In his comments, Zelensky did not provide details about the internal US discussions or about the specific positions that Washington has advanced in Geneva. However, recent statements from US Officials suggest a continued commitment to supporting Kyiv while also exploring potential diplomatic pathways. US representatives have emphasized that any settlement must be acceptable to Ukraine and must respect internationally recognized borders. At the same time, American officials have acknowledged that the conflict has entered a phase in which negotiated arrangements are increasingly being examined alongside ongoing military assistance. Zelensky's message also included an implicit reminder that Ukraine views peace not as a short-term pause in hostilities, but as a durable, enforceable agreement that addresses the full scale of the consequences created since the Russian invasion. This includes reconstruction needs, accountability processes, mechanisms for monitoring compliance, and long-term security architecture. Ukrainian officials have stated that without such guarantees, any temporary reduction in violence would not constitute genuine peace. The president's tone in the video address, measured, focused, and procedural, aligns with his recent diplomatic communications, in which he has sought to balance urgency with strategic discipline. While Kyiv continues to describe the military front as challenging, officials have also pointed to ongoing defensive operations, efforts to protect critical infrastructure, and work to stabilize energy supplies as winter approaches. Diplomatic engagement has intensified as well. Ukrainian negotiators have held a series of technical meetings with US counterparts in recent weeks, focusing on humanitarian issues, economic assistance, and military planning. Kyiv has also been involved in consultations with European leaders about sanctions, enforcement, financial support packages, and coordination ahead of upcoming international summits. All of these efforts form part of what Zelensky has described as a multi-layered approach to securing a sustainable end to the conflict. Despite these developments, the Ukrainian government continues to signal caution. Officials in Kyiv have said that premature declarations of progress could weaken their negotiating position or create unrealistic expectations among the public. Instead, the emphasis has been on careful messaging that acknowledges advancements while underscoring the scale of the remaining challenges. Zelensky's remarks in Sweden fit into this pattern by highlighting specific achievements such as keeping key humanitarian issues on the negotiating table. The president underscores the seriousness of the Geneva discussions. At the same time, by emphasizing that more work is required, he conveys that Ukraine will not accept partial solutions that do not address the full scope of the conflict. The president's comments also reflect the broader sentiment within Ukraine's political and military leadership. Members of the government, as well as senior military officers, have repeatedly asserted that any agreement must reflect the sacrifices made by Ukrainian society and must prevent the conditions for future conflict. Ukrainian officials continue to point to past experiences in which ceasefires or agreements were violated, arguing that only a comprehensive settlement with enforceable mechanisms can provide lasting stability. International reactions to Zelensky's statement have been measured but generally supportive. European leaders have continued to call for a just and durable peace based on international law, while stressing the importance of Ukrainian sovereignty. Several countries participating in the Swedish conference echoed these sentiments, emphasizing that any future settlement must be shaped by Ukraine's decisions, not imposed externally. For humanitarian issues, Zelensky raised prisoners of war, civilian detainees, and abducted children have drawn particular attention from international organizations. Agencies involved in monitoring conflict-related detentions have welcomed efforts to prioritize these issues in negotiations. Human rights groups have called for transparent verification processes, monitored exchanges, and legal accountability for documented abuses. As Ukraine approaches the fourth year of the war, the political landscape in Kyiv also remains under close observation. The government continues to maintain emergency measures and economic challenges persist. Infrastructure demands remain significant, particularly in regions impacted by missile and drone attacks. These domestic pressures form part of the backdrop against which the diplomatic discussions are unfolding. Zelensky's message, delivered to an international audience, also serves to reinforce Ukraine's broader diplomatic position. By speaking openly about the substance of the Geneva discussions without revealing classified or sensitive details, the president signals transparency and strategic engagement with global partners. His remarks aim to assure both domestic and international audiences that Ukraine remains committed to securing peace through a combination of diplomacy, resilience, and coordination with its allies. The conference in Sweden, which included political leaders, experts, and international observers, offered a platform for Zelensky to reiterate Ukraine's priorities. While his speech was brief, its core themes reflected months of preparatory work and extensive consultations with international partners. The emphasis on humanitarian issues aligns with Ukraine's ongoing efforts to document war crimes, gather evidence, and strengthen cooperation with international courts and organizations. The president's closing note that real peace requires more than the steps achieved so far underscores the central message of his address. It suggests that while Ukraine welcomes progress, it remains fully aware that negotiations are still at an early and uncertain stage. Kyiv continues to insist that any final agreement must address not only immediate humanitarian concerns, but also the wider political and security structures that will shape Ukraine's future. As the diplomatic process continues, the Geneva Channel is expected to remain a key focal point. Further rounds of technical and political consultations are anticipated, with both sides indicating that the discussions are ongoing. Ukrainian officials have said that they will continue to push for the inclusion of humanitarian, territorial, and security issues within a single, coherent framework. For now, Zelensky's message serves as an official update on the state of the talks, cautious, factual, and focused on specific areas of progress. His emphasis on prisoners, civilians, and children highlights the human dimension of the conflict, while his call for additional work reflects the broader strategic environment. The situation remains fluid, and the outcome of the negotiations is still uncertain. But for Ukraine, the priorities remain clear: the release of its citizens, the protection of its sovereignty, and the establishment of conditions for a lasting and enforceable peace. The process continues, and the next steps will depend on developments in Geneva, coordination with Western partners, and the evolving situation on the ground.